the FBI today seizing the cell phone of a Republican congressman who's best known for pushing a bogus conspiracy theory about the 2020 election. His name is Scott Perry. CNN's Sarah Murray joins us now with more on that story. So what is Scott Perry saying tonight?
Well, he put out a lengthy statement describing what happened, and he said, "This morning, while traveling with my family, 3 FBI agents visited me and seized my cell phone." Now, he goes on to say this cell phone is full of information about political activities, personal and private discussions, legislative activities, things he says the government has no business looking into. What we don't know is what the FBI is investigating that led them to Scott Perry's cell phone. We know that Perry was, integral in pushing Donald Trump's claims of election fraud. We know that he actually introduced the former president to Jeffrey Clark, who was a Department of Justice official who was little known at the time, who was willing to go along with Donald Trump's election fraud claims and willing to, try to stage a coup, essentially, at the Justice Department. So it's not clear if it is perhaps related to that. We reported earlier this summer that Jeffrey Clark's home was searched, so he's been under scrutiny from investigators. The other thing we don't know about what's going on with Scott Perry's phone is what investigators will be able to get from it. CNN previously reported that Perry had a number of discussions with Mark Meadows, the former White House chief of staff, and in those discussions they used an encrypted messaging app. So we don't know if those messages could still be on his phone.
Right, they used Signal, wasn't it?
They used Signal, right. So we don't know if those could still be on Scott Perry's phone. And again, we don't know if that is what investigators were looking for or if it could be something else altogether. So there are still a lot of questions, but obviously a big deal that they're coming for a sitting congressman's cell phone.
Yeah, Sarah Murray, appreciate it. Thank you. I want to get perspective now on the legal and the political impacts of all these stories. Joining us tonight is CNN chief national correspondent and Inside Politics anchor John King, CNN legal analyst Elliot Williams, who served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Obama administration, and CNN chief political analyst Gloria Borger. John, how significant are these new details? The search came after suspicions of withheld materials, that documents at Mar-a-Lago had national security implications.
Well, we have more of a sketch now. We still don't have key information. What do they mean by national security implications? How many documents? What do they relate to? But we now at least have a broader sketch of the urgency that convinced the FBI and then the Justice Department, all the way up to the Attorney General, to take this unprecedented step, to serve a search warrant at the home of the former President of the United States. Now, there's a lot of hyperbole being thrown around. Look, make no mistake about it, Anderson, at some point, the Justice Department will face a credibility test, both in court and in public opinion. That day should not be today. We are early in an investigation, or we're at some point in an investigation where the Justice Department says it can't talk to us just yet. But the fact that they took the extraordinary nature suggests this was a 15-month process. Many communications with Trump and with his lawyers, including a meeting in June that the former president stopped in. So something happened between June and August where the FBI saw a reason, we don't know the specifics, to believe something was at risk, some document was at threat. And just very quickly on this point that Trump has the power to declassify records, that's true. A, but there's a process, and B, even if he declassified everything, they don't belong to him. He can't take it with him. The Records Act is very clear. The documents belong to the American people, and they go to the National Archives, period.
Well, it's also remarkable, John King, I mean, based on his criticism of others over the years on, handling emails or alleged security violations.
If you're looking for intellectual consistency here, Anderson, you came to the wrong town, in the sense that if you listen to Donald Trump and you listen to his Republican allies, they remember Hillary Clinton should be about 6 years into her prison sentence at Leavenworth, according to these Republicans, because she set up a server at home that might have sensitive information go through it, that it was possible the Chinese or the Russians could hack into. They raised that at the point. That was a judgment error by Secretary Clinton. I'm not here to defend Hillary Clinton's email server, but Donald Trump should we run for president of the United States again? Donald Trump is innocent. The Justice Department is overstretching. This is political use of the investigative powers. There is zero intellectual consistency in Trump's argument or that of his Republican allies at the moment.
Elliot, from a legal perspective, what do these developments tell you?
Yeah, I think the newest development today is this idea of people in Trump's orbit not being honest or candid or forthcoming with information when asked. Look, it is a crime to give a false statement to a law enforcement officer. That doesn't have to be under oath or sworn or when we're talking about perjury or something like that. If an agent is trying to find out where documents are and you lie to that agent, that is a crime. In addition to that, Anderson, of course, there's the raft of possible crimes that might be investigated here involving sort of mishandling or mutilating or tearing up documents and so on. So the newest thing today by far is this allegation of dishonesty. But again, all of these crimes that we're talking about possibly being investigated are incredibly serious and reason for concern and alarm.
And Gloria, I understand you have some new reporting about how the search could be pushing the former president to speed up a 2024 announcement.
Right. A group of my colleagues and I are reporting this evening that some top Republicans who have spent an awful lot of time these past months trying to tell Donald Trump, don't declare for the presidency until after the midterm elections because they were worried he was going to be a divisive figure, are now changing their minds. And that even one top Republican has called him up, at least one, and said, you know, I'm really thinking you ought to do it now. And the reason is that the Republican Party, it seems, has been so united with him, and they believe that there is another issue for them to talk about aside from the 2020 election, which was Donald Trump's favorite issue. But now this could become his issue, and he can portray himself as the victim, as the leader of people who feel victimized in this country and don't like the deep state, and that this would give their people more momentum than, in fact, the Democrats might have, say, because of the Roe Wade decision, or they're sick of Donald Trump. So they're now changing their minds.
John, there's new reporting from the New York Times tonight that you may not have seen yet, that the former president dismissed a push from some of his advisors today to fly back to Mar-a-Lago and immediately announce a new presidential campaign.
Look, there's this calculation. Do you take advantage of the outrage among your supporters to announce now? The midterm elections, Anderson, are 90 days away. So I think any speculation about how this could impact 2024, let alone 2022, is premature. 3 months ago, the Democrats were in a mess. Now the Democrats are in better shape. That's just this year. But the idea that Trump could play victim and use this to somehow block out rivals in 2024, that's the thinking of some of his people. That is because they play on the power of grievance, and now they believe they have a grievance. But we have no facts on the table. So that is their political calculation. If he announces he's running for president now, it changes how he can raise money. It changes how he can move around the country. So it gives him some benefits in claiming political grievance and claiming now I'm a candidate. The Justice Department shouldn't chase me down. Elliot can explain that the rules, that's not the way the rules work. But this has been an ongoing drama in Trump land. And so today it is he should rush home and announce, or he should rush it out before Labor Day. There'll be another story tomorrow, and eventually he'll say something, and that's when we'll start the clock.
And, I mean, Elliot, is it accurate that the former president and his legal team would get a copy of the warrant, which he could release to the public? I mean, isn't the warrant required to list everything they anticipate finding, or can some of it be sealed?
No. Only the warrant's actually just an administrative document that says that we believe that there's evidence of a crime here. It's got the signature on it. The good stuff, Anderson, that you're talking about is in the affidavits and applications for the warrant. Now, look, he gets an inventory of all of the materials that were seized from his property. If he really is saying that these are declassified or unimportant documents or just, mementos from his trip to Finland or whatever, then certainly he can release that. He's going to have that information. But all of the documentation that really digs in as to what, I think what the public wants to see isn't going to be seen either until someone is charged with a crime or the basis for keeping it secret goes away and when an investigation is closed.
Gloria, I mean, do you believe that this will have an impact on the midterms, or too soon to tell? I mean, we don't know what's come of this.
I think it's really too soon to tell. Other than when you talk to Republicans who are saying, one Republican who's very close to Donald Trump said to me today, I have not seen the party this unified behind something in a long time. I mean, when do you see DeSantis and Pence on the same page defending Trump? And they believe that there is enough of a lead time that this could affect and could motivate Republican voters, which they've been kind of worried about, particularly if Donald Trump were to announce, because he's been so divisive. But it's early, as John was saying, and we're just going to have to wait and see how this plays out. The advantage they have, of course, is that the Justice Department isn't going to say anything in return. So they can punch and punch and punch, and it's very likely that the Justice Department will stay silent.
Gloria Borger, John King, Elliot Williams, thank you.